Have you ever been stuck on a weight loss plateau, trying everything and anything you can to lose that extra weight and reach peak health? We've all been there, but Noom's unlocked the secret to reaching the mountaintop. Go in micro. The Noom GLP-1 microdose program starts at $99 and is delivered to your door in 7 days. Start your microdose GLP-1 journey today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Noom. Micro changes, big results. Noom GLP-1 RX program involves healthy diet, exercise, and support. Individual results may vary. Meds and personalization based on clinical need. Not reviewed by FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality. No affiliation with Novo Nordisk Inc., the only U.S. source of FDA-approved semaglutide. Not available in all 50 U.S. states.
Boost Mobile is now sending experts nationwide to deliver and set up customers' new phones.
Wait, we're going on tour?
We're delivering and setting up customers' phones. It's not a tour.
Not with that attitude.
Introducing Store to Door. Switch and get a new device with expert setup and delivery.
Delivery available for select devices purchased at boostmobile.com.
Walmart Business is in the business of helping your business. Regardless of whether you're building bridges, building spreadsheets, or building lesson plans. Ooh, that looks fun. Walmart Business can help save you time, money, and hassle so you can focus on what you're building instead of what your supply closet is missing. In short, we take care of business so you can do more with yours. We're the Walmart you love, now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com.
Welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
To me, being perfect is not about that scoreboard out there.
This is a chance of a lifetime.
When you can understand the person, you can then work towards a common goal.
We are all on the same team.
Know your role and do it to the best of your ability.
Focus on the fundamentals. We've gone over time and time again.
Your defense has got to be better.
Leave no doubt tonight.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
Hello and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast, where we believe there is no algorithm for leadership, and so we interview great sports coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us lead our families, our colleagues, and our teams better. Our great coach on this episode is Doug Maclean. Doug is a former ice hockey head coach, GM, and sportscaster. His coaching career started in his hometown of Summerside with high school teams. By 1990, he had his first professional job leading the Baltimore Skipjacks. A successful stint there saw him move to the Detroit Red Wings as an assistant coach and ultimately to the head coach role at the Florida Panthers in 1995. In his first season, he led them to the Stanley Cup playoffs. In 98, he moved to the Columbus Bluejackets as the GM and commenced the second phase of his career. Then, in 2008, he rounded out that career in professional hockey by moving into broadcasting. Doug is a great storyteller, and some of the highlights of our discussion were how one of the most rewarding experiences of his life was starting a franchise from scratch, his view on being direct and that you can never be too honest, even though he once made an NHL player cry, and how in a healthy team culture, players want to get to practice and they care about doing their bit for the group. This really was a wonderful conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. But just before we get to the interview, if you enjoy listening to the podcast and would like to learn more, you can head over to our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com. There you will find more video and podcast content taken from the 150 plus interviews we have produced with some of the world's greatest coaches. You'll also find our insight database where we have snipped out insights from the videos of our interviews on leadership topics like culture, communication, and conflict. You can search through by keyword, sport, or coach, download and share them. We'll be adding to it regularly as we interview more great coaches from around the world. We also have a newsletter that features information on our latest podcasts, leadership insights from our guests, recommendations they have on books, articles or other media, as well as information on how you can engage with other people who listen to the podcast in our live events. And now please enjoy our interview with Doug Maclean.
You're listening to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Doug Maclean, good morning and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor. I actually saw the podcast listed somewhere, and I thought that's a really interesting looking podcast. And lo and behold, I get invited to go on it, which is pretty bizarre because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it said great coaches. I'm not sure I fit that category.
Well, do you know, every person I interview says the same thing. So we might go through your story and then we can let the audience decide whether you fit into that great coach bracket. But I think you are a great coach, but for, I think, reasons that are a little different from others, and they'll become clear as we move along. But Doug, could I start with something really simple? Where are you in the world and what have you been doing so far today?
Well, I'm in Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is an island off the east coast, off Nova Scotia. And it's a place where I was actually born and played my minor hockey in Prince Edward Island. My family was all here, or obviously all here, and went to college at the University of Prince Edward Island and became a school teacher, high school teacher for 7 years before I get into professional coaching. Coached the local high school junior team prior to becoming an NHL coach. So Prince Edward Island has been an amazing part of my life.
Doug, you've had some great experience up close with some fantastic ice hockey coaches. When I was researching you, I saw names like Brian Murray, his brother Terry, Don Boyd, Jacques Martin, and of course Scott Bowman. And I'm wondering, from seeing all these people up close and watching them work, what is it you think the great coaches do differently that sets them apart?
Wow, that's a really great question. And I think about Brian was my mentor. I worked with him as an assistant coach. I was his head coach when he became a general manager. Guy that I just tremendously, and a great leader. But a guy that cared about his players. He was a fair, straight shooter. And I think the one trait that besides being a good person and all those things, he managed the room better than any coach I know. Like, one of the biggest challenges of a head coach in the National Hockey League, because, you've got a group that don't like you and a group that really hate you and a group that really like you. And Brian was able to manage the room with the best of them and keep a cohesive dressing room. I think I admired that. Besides the fact he knew the game and he could teach the game, a former high school teacher himself, and Brian just passed away a few short years ago, and I worked with him for 10, 12 years. And I miss him and I admire him so much. And if it wasn't for Brian Murray, I wouldn't have been an NHL head coach, general manager, president, any of those jobs. Brian was really the guy. So I just think good person, fair, straight shooter, managed the room and knew the game. Scotty Bowman, different. Scotty Bowman, the greatest coach in the history of the National Hockey League. 9 Stanley Cup rings. The most rings, most championships of any NHL coach. He was hard as nails, tough, miserable. Players shook their heads. They could never figure him out. He drove them crazy. All he ever did was win. I said to a guy, must have been amazing. You won 3 Stanley Scotty, must have been an amazing, or you won 5 Stanley Cups with Scotty, with the Montreal Canadiens. He must have been an amazing coach. He said, if it wasn't for Scotty, we would have won 7. I talked to him every once in a while. I was doing a radio show in Toronto for a long time, and I used to get texts from him all the time saying, hey, I love your take. I really respect what you're And I thought, oh my God, how great a compliment is that Scotty Bowman would say that about what I'm saying about hockey. So he's a legend. So I got a chance to be around Brian Murray, who I consider a legend, and Scotty Bowman, who definitely is a legend of the game of hockey.
Doug, your first job back in 1977 was coaching junior hockey. Then in 81, you became the first head coach of the Summerside Western Capitals. They were an expansion franchise. And I'm just wondering, as you cast your mind back to that time, what did you actually learn about setting up a team culture from that role?
Well, you know what? I was actually a kid. I mean, I was 23 out of college, played college hockey, went to St. Louis Blues, the NHL, their training camp, and thought I was going to be a pro player. And I ended up back in my hometown teaching high school, and then you know what? I really felt like I was really ready to coach, that I had, you know, good experience as a player and playing for the Montreal Junior Canadiens and playing college hockey and good competitive hockey all the way up through that. I wanted to be a high school teacher bad, and I also wanted to be a coach. And setting up a culture was always, and I go back to what I said about Brian Murray. Brian was a straight shooter. I was a straight shooter. And I think if you're honest with your players, setting up that culture is easier. And you teach the life skills of the game, the winning seems to happen. And, you know, we had good success. When I was a high school coach, I had success. When I was a junior coach, I had success. I wish I would have had more success later on than I did early on, but that happens. But setting up the culture was, I always thought, you set up a healthy culture, a healthy environment, and the players want to get to practice, and they want to practice, and they really want to win for the team, and you care about the group. I think culture looks after itself.
So, Doug, you go from that experience to 1989 when you get your first chance of being a head coach at the pro level with the Baltimore Skipjacks. However, on this occasion, it's kind of different because you take over from the great coach we talked about in the intro, Terry Murray. And I'm wondering, how did you have to adjust your style when taking over from a leader like Terry?
Well, it was a really bizarre experience. And I don't know if you know what happened, but I was the assistant coach with the Washington Capitals with Brian Murray as the head coach, and I was his assistant. Terry was coaching Baltimore at the time, our farm team. And Brian gets fired in Washington, and Terry takes over for him. So this is brothers. One brother gets fired for the other brother, and I'm in the middle of it thinking, are you kidding me? So I go to Baltimore to take over for Terry. Terry goes to Washington to take over for his brother as the head coach. Terry Murray, an interesting guy. He and I have had our battles over the years, I got to tell you. You know, we were sort of rivals because I was Brian's assistant for a long time in the NHL, and Terry was, you know, had been Brian's assistant. And there was a little bit of a internal battle there, but I always really respect Terry's knowledge of the game and the way he taught the game. He was a great teacher of the game. So when I go to Baltimore to take over from him, they had a good team. Terry was a taskmaster. He was tough on his players. So I went in there, and I was a different personality than Terry. And I think it was a nice, real skilled technician. And I went in, I was a little more laid back. And I think it was a really good fit for me to take over for him because they had the basic fundamentals of the game down. They're systematic. The systems were really in place. And it was an easy takeover to take over from Terry. And we've talked a lot over the years, actually. And last time I saw him was at Brian's funeral. We had a great chat. Terry went on to coach a lot in the NHL. I coached against him with the Philadelphia Flyers. I coached against him when he was head coach of the LA Kings. So we sort of had an intertwined career for a long time. But Terry was a great great coach, good person. And it's just that we were sort of rivals all the way through. You know what I mean? I'd love to know what Terry would say about me. Maybe he wouldn't be as, well, it would be fun.
Well, I'll chase him down and interview him next. I'll ask him that very question.
Exactly.
So this is where your story starts to get even more interesting, because your apprenticeship finishes in 95 and you go off and you're appointed as the head coach of the Florida Panthers in the NHL, and you make it all the way to the Stanley Cup in that first year. Now, I'm intrigued. First year Stanley Cup. What did you do when you first got there that helped drive that result?
I'll never forget the day I got the job, and it was sort of out of the blue that Brian Murray was the general manager. And I'll never forget interviewing with Brian, and it was at a restaurant in Detroit, because we had been in Detroit together before I got the Florida job, Brian and I. We're interviewing at, I'll never forget, a fast food place called Bob's Big Boy. And we're sitting in a booth, and I said, Brian, I really want this head coaching job. And he said, Doug, our owner, Wayne Huizenga, who was, Blockbuster Video, one of the most famous American entrepreneurs at the time, billionaire guy that owned the team, was really looking for a more famous coach. And Brian's sort of saying, hey, Doug, I'd love to, I just don't know where Wayne would be on this hire. You've been assistant coach and a little bit of head coaching experience. I don't know. And I looked at Brian squarely in the eyes and I said, Brian, I'm going to tell you this right now. We've been together for 7 or 8 years. You'd be an idiot not to hire me for this job. And he looked at me and he said, So he said, okay, we ended that meeting. I didn't know I was getting the job or not, but he said, let me talk to Wayne and let me talk to Bill Torrey, who was our president, famous hockey guy, Bill Torrey, from New York Islander fame. And probably 2 months later, at the draft in Edmonton in July, Brian called me into a meeting, and he and Bill Torrey, and they said, we're going to offer you the job. And honest to God, it was the highlight of my life. It was the highlight of my life. And I was making about $100,000 a year. And he said, we're going to give you a 3-year contract, $250, $275, $300. And I'm thinking, I just made $1 million in 3 years. And you know what? It just took off. But I'll tell you what was the most bizarre thing. I got the job, and I phoned Brian Scrudlin, who was our captain, who I had never met. And he lived in Calgary. I phoned Brian. I said, Brian, I want to introduce myself. Doug Maclean, new head coach. He said, oh, great. He said, I said, really, I'm really excited. He said, Doug, let me just tell you this. We have a really good team. This was the 3rd year of this franchise, the start of the 3rd year of the franchise. He said, Doug, we've got a unique group, and we've got a really good team. I just want you to know that as you come in. And I knew they had been competitive, but I'm telling you, I went in there because of Brian Scrudlin's motivational speech that he gave the new head coach, the captain. I went in there pretty pumped. And you know what? We lost the first game in New Jersey, and I'm flying home on our team plane, and I'm a little uptight. Brian comes and sits with me, and he's a little uptight. We didn't play great. Then we won 5 in a row. At Christmas, we're in first place in the entire NHL. At the All-Star break, we're in first place in the entire NHL, and I was awarded to be the NHL All-Star coach that year. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, what is going on? This is a 3rd-year team, but they just had so much character. They were sort of looking to break out as a group and be a little more free-flowing. Roger Nielsen, the great Roger Nielsen, had coached them for 2 years, and I took his place. Very solid, great defensive coach. The team learned a great defensive system. So I opened the game up a little bit, and they flourished. I mean, we were hard to believe, we were one of the best teams in the league all year. And I've never seen a group of players with such character. I look at them now today, all the years since 96, and almost every guy in that team has had a wonderful career, whether it was in real estate, whether it was in coaching, whether it was in management, whatever they got They were all successful people. And I still keep in touch with a lot of them, run into a lot of them. They were a unique group. And for us to go as a third-year expansion team to the Stanley Cup final was one of the most bizarre things in the history of the NHL. It really was, because it didn't happen. Like today it happens a little bit more, but in those days it was unheard of. And it was an amazing group of individuals, and they just competed. We had good structure, we had good systems, we had great goaltending with John Van Beesbroek, but they were a special group. They really were. And a lot of them are coaches and general managers in the NHL today, which is really pretty rewarding to see.
Well, what's fascinating is unfortunately that Stanley Cup didn't fall your way, but your career takes a fascinating turn from here because you leave head coaching and you become a general manager, and not just any general manager. You head off to Columbus, and they become one of the most successful organizations in the NHL. And I'm really curious, Doug. You've had these two different roles, and we haven't even got into the third one yet as an author and a sportscaster. But what have these different roles taught you about the art of leadership? To become the when I finished coaching, it was a really big decision to leave coaching and go into management. And you do it because you get an offer, and I remember getting a call from the Columbus owner asking if I'd be interested in talking to him about the job. And I meet with him, and I'm thinking, okay, just a minute. You're getting an opportunity to start a franchise from scratch. And I remember walking into my office when I got the job in Columbus. We're still a year and a half before we played a game, and there was like an empty pad of paper on the desk. And I had to hire 250 people to run our franchise. We had to build a building. We had to sell hockey in Columbus, Ohio, which was not a hockey town. It was Ohio State football, famous football country. I'm thinking, like, what have I got myself into here? But it was one of the, I did 11 years in Columbus, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences you could ever have in your life. Starting a franchise from scratch and having to hire every person in there, or hire the key people, and they hire their people. And, to build up to opening night with a brand new building, a brand new staff, a brand new hockey staff, a brand new team, the infrastructure of the building, 1,000 people working in the building on opening night, and thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. And I remember my parents flew up from PEI for opening night. My owner sent his private jet to pick them up, to bring them to Columbus and bring my family there. It was an amazing, amazing experience. So, it was tough. I was always torn between coaching and management, but coaching, management, really different. Management, you have to look at the big picture. You have to look long range. It was a whole different kettle of fish for me, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, and I sit here today thinking, I wish I had to do it over again. I would have done, when you can sit back and look at the big picture to say, wow, I get in there and thought I was a know-it-all, and wow, I learned a lot. And there was a lot I didn't know, but it was just it was an experience. Well, coached an expansion team to the Stanley Cup, starting an NHL team from scratch. Not many people get to do that, and I'm really lucky. And I ended up with a 24-year career in the NHL. But I do say this: I wish I would have had a few things over. I wish I would have had a couple of things to redo, like a lot of things. But that's life, Tell us about one or two of them.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you the biggest challenge in professional hockey, professional sports, is dealing with the media. It's a really tough job. You finish a game where it's a war out there. It's a battle. It's every shift is important, and then you finish a game, and 10 minutes later, you're in front of a media throng of media people. And you just, after I spent years in the media, I thought, damn it, I wish I would have been a media guy first before I was a coach, because I got, you get short with them. You get confrontational. You say things you shouldn't have said. And I sit back today and I regret that I wasn't better at that. And it's funny how many people I've talked to about that, how many coaches. I'll see a young coach in the NHL sort of go off in the media after a game, and I'll send him a text, because I know this kid really well. He's a great NHL coach. And I sent him a note. I said, just be calm. Be calm. Don't, just, try to let things happen, let it happen. Don't be confrontational. And, so that's the number one thing, really. I don't have any regrets how I treated people. I think back of all the players I had and coaches and scouts and people that worked for me. There's not a person that I would feel uncomfortable with meeting and sitting down and having a beer or a coffee or a sandwich with. I liked all the people. I didn't like how some of them played, but I always liked them as people. And I think that's a regret about me, the media side of it. But the greatest thing is you meet unbelievable people from my first year in the NHL through the 24 years to the end. I mean, I still run into people and love spending time with guys that I coached 25 years ago. My son deals with a guy in Chicago who was a player on the first NHL team I coached in St. Louis in 1987. So, you know what? The year my son was born, that guy he deals with from a hockey basis was on my team in 87 in St. Louis. Gino Cavallini was his name. And I think of all the great memories and all the people I've met. And I think that's more important than how good a coach you were. You know that? I think the friendships, the people you meet, the challenges you face, but still, seriously, I think, how did I make a living? How did I make a living doing this? How lucky was I,
Have you ever been stuck on a weight loss plateau, trying everything and anything you can to lose that extra weight and reach peak health? We've all been there, but Noom's unlocked the secret to reaching the mountaintop. Go in micro. The Noom GLP-1 microdose program starts at $99 and is delivered to your door in 7 days. Start your microdose GLP-1 journey today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Noom. Micro changes, big results. Noom GLP-1 RX program involves healthy diet, exercise, and support. Individual results may vary. Meds and personalization based on clinical need. Not reviewed by FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality. No affiliation with Novo Nordisk, Inc., the only U.S. source of FDA-approved semaglutide. Not available in all 50 U.S. states.
Walmart Business is in the business of helping your business. Regardless of whether you're building bridges, building spreadsheets, or building lesson plans. Ooh, that looks fun. Walmart Business can help save you time, money, and hassle so you can focus on what you're building instead of what your supply closet is missing. In short, we take care of business so you can do more with yours. We're the Walmart you love, now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com.
You definitely were lucky. You've had we're only halfway through the story, I guess. And what's interesting about your career is, and researching you and learning about you for today, people keep describing you as being honest and truthful. It comes up time and time and time again. So you've clearly built some equity in that area. But it got me thinking, a long career in the cutthroat world, as you described it, it's like a war out there. When you're in this kind of environment and it comes to leading people, either on the ice or up in the office, can you ever be too honest?
That's a great question. I don't know if you can ever be too honest. I really don't think you can be. I mean, I know there's a ton of coaches that are more aloof, not dishonest. I don't mean that, but more aloof. My personality is, I wanted to relate to the guys. I wanted to have a bit of a relate. I don't mean a cozy cuddle. Look, I had guys in my room. I'd give them a blast so bad that I said the weirdest thing that ever happened in my life is I'm yelling at a player in the dressing room, and I didn't play in the NHL, and he starts to cry, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I just made an NHL player cry. Like, what the hell am I doing here? How? Because these players, they put their career on the line every day. It's one thing to make the NHL, which a minuscule number of people make the top of the top. And then to stay there is even more pressure because somebody's trying to take your job every day. I just thought it was better to be honest. And maybe was I too honest? I don't think so. I think I was just a straight shooter. And I know how I would like to be treated and how I wish how you hope to be treated in your career by your bosses. And I just never thought there was any other way. And I think, I don't have regrets about that. I have regrets about a few things, but not about being honest with players and being a straight shooter. Too many people in our business play games. And I know when I was in the media, I started to call out those games, and sometimes it wasn't very popular, but, I would rather go with the honest approach, Like I say to minor hockey coaches all the time, one of the greatest tests of a minor hockey coach is if the kid that's playing for you finishes the season and he says to his dad, man, I learned a lot from that coach this year, and I really, really would like to play for him again. I said, if your kid on your team really wants to play for you again next year, you're a successful coach. That means something, So I think guys enjoyed playing for me. Although, look, lots of times, I'll never forget Lindy Ruff, the coach for the New Jersey Devils, who just lost out in the playoffs, was my assistant coach. I'm on the bench. Ray Shepard, 50-goal scorer for me in Florida, 50-goal scorer when I coached him in Detroit. And I'm yelling at him on the bench, and I'm in his ear on the bench. And I never thought a thing of it. Lindy calls me in the next morning. We're doing our video set up for our team meeting. He said, look at this. So I'm yelling in Ray Shepard's ear on the bench about a play, and the camera zooms in on me yelling at Ray, and Ray's rolling his eyes in his head as I'm giving him hell. So we put it in the video meeting. I said, hey, Shep, I really see you like my points I made to you last night. We showed a close-up of him rolling his eyes. Well, when I run into Shep today, he plays at the golf course 20 minutes from my house in Florida. We laugh about it, but it's so Lindy, who's went on to be a great coach in Buffalo and with New Jersey Devils and Dallas, and one of my great friends, we had lots of laughs over that. So, I just think that, the relationship with players is really, really important from a teaching perspective and a management perspective. To get the most out of them, you have to teach them. You have to show a player, and especially as an assistant coach, the number one thing you have to do is, I can make you a better player. And if they believe that, they'll listen to everything you say. If they don't believe it, you're done. So help make them a better player, help them last longer in the league, give them chances. That's what it's all about. You can't come in as an NHL assistant coach or coach and just roll on. Players have got to believe you can help them win and help them be better. That's what it's all about.
Doug, in that answer there, you talked about people wanting to take your job. And of course, you've talked about it already a few times in this interview, being sacked, being fired, being moved on. It's part of life in professional sports. But I'm just wondering, when younger people, coaches or players, come to you these days and ask for advice about being fired, about dealing with it, about bouncing back from it, what do you tell them?
It's interesting with the general population with respect to coaches being fired. They say, well, that's part of the job. That's part of it. And I recall when I got fired, it was devastating. It was devastating. Probably partially because I hadn't been a former NHL player. And I thought, okay, this is what happens here. How do I survive? How do I get another job? And you know what? It was awful. My first time I got fired, I was assistant coach of the Washington Capitals. Jill was pregnant. Wife Jill was pregnant to my daughter, Mackenzie. I had $500 in my bank account, and we had to leave the States because our health insurance was running out. And I'm thinking, what? I'm an NHL coach and assistant coach, and it wasn't, it was enough to live on. And I'm thinking, okay, we got to be out of here. We got to leave the country. You're pregnant. I've got $500 in my bank account, and we got to go. We got to move. And it was tough. Jill and I, we've been married 46 years. In our marriage, we lived in 29 houses in our lives. And that meant we'd move to a new city. We'd rent the first year. We'd buy the second year, and I'd get fired the third year. And then we'd rent, buy. So, you know what? It was a part of our life, getting fired. I often say every time I got fired, I doubled my salary. Every time. And I was just talking to Gerard Gallant, just fired as coach of the New York Rangers. A kid I taught in high school, by the way, taught Gerard in high school, just got fired as a Ranger coach. And he was telling me that every time he gets fired, he doubles his salary. I said, well, that happened to me too for a while, Gerard. And then all of a sudden it went to a third. When I went to the media, it went to a third. So don't always think it's going to double. Anyway, it's tough. It's the toughest part of the job. And nobody understands it except the guy that's in the trenches and it happens to. And when I had to fire coaches, I hated it. And as a general manager, I had to fire a couple of coaches, and I didn't like it a little bit,
Well, I want to ask you about this third career you've got. You one you just alluded to that's a third of the salary. You carved out a third career, a very successful career as an analyst and a sports broadcaster. Yeah. But the question is, how would Doug Maclean, the coach, respond to you as a sports analyst?
A media person in Columbus said to a friend of mine, this is a guy I didn't have a great relationship with in Columbus. He said, Doug Maclean, the coach, would hate Doug Maclean, the analyst. And I thought, he's probably right, but you know what? It's sort of funny. It sort of happened. I was so burnt out when I left Columbus after 11 years. I was burnt out, and I thought, and I got a chance to go and go to Toronto and work in TV and radio. But hey, let's try this. And I went in, and it was my start of I just did a little bit part-time the first year. And then when I went in, they offered me a full-time job. And the boss said to me, Doug, if you are doing this job to get another head coaching job or a GM's job, you're not going to be successful, because I need you to tell it the way it is. And you're going to ruffle some feathers. Well, I should have probably not listened to him, because I told it the way it was, and I'm not sure it helped my career. I had a couple other opportunities to go back to the NHL and secondary type jobs, and I never really jumped at it. And then, I had a 10-year career in radio, TV, and I really, really enjoyed it. I really did. And, we had a great show that was huge in Canada and the U.S., Hockey Central at noon with Nick Kiprios and Darren Millard, and two amazing people. Nick, who I had coached, by the way, in Baltimore, which is hard to believe, and with the Washington Capitals, ended up the way I got the job was Nick had played for me in Washington and Baltimore. And when I got fired, he phoned me and said, "Hey, do you want me to talk to the bosses about you coming to work with us in Columbus?" And this is Nick, who was a kid I used to deal with in the dressing room, and a good guy. And we hit it off as a great team. And so it's funny how a guy that I coached in the Baltimore Skipjacks helped me get a job in the media. So it's pretty bizarre. So I had a wonderful run, and it was a great way to see the game, watch the game, study the game, deal with people in the game, and talk about the game. It was a great combination, and I've got to say I really enjoyed it. You know.
Well, now of course there's the fourth element of the career, which is the book you've got coming out later this year, and it's called Draft Day: How Hockey Teams Pick Winners or Get Left Behind. Could you tell us what was the impetus for the book?
Well, it's funny. I retired at Sportsnet. I was 66 years of age, and I get a call from Simon & Schuster, the publishing company and book publishing company, and the guy phones me. Actually, it was an agent phoning me, a literary agent phoning me. Said, "Hey, Simon & Schuster phoned me. They listened to you on the show. They knew your career. Would you consider doing a book?" And I really don't want to do a book. I really have I thought it was a book about me. And I really have no interest in that. And he said, no, it's a book about the draft, your experiences with the draft. And then that changed it totally, because I thought, wow. But you know what? It was 3 years writing this book. One of the biggest challenges I've ever had in my life. I mean, I had written an email before. And I had my master's in educational psychology from college, but that was 100 years ago. And I'm thinking, I got to write. Well, I took my wife Jill got me a printer, not a printer, but a thing for my iPad that I could type on. And I started outlining chapters and making notes, and I wrote 14 chapters, 7,000 words over the last in a year and a half, just about my stories. And Scott Morrison, who wrote with me, was a great writer. As I say, he put the commas and periods in, but he did a lot more than that. He was my writer. But one of the great experiences, and I talked to a ton of GMs, a ton of coaches, hockey executives about the book, for the book. And now I see it finished, coming out in October. It's kind of exciting, It's something I never thought I'd ever do. And it was a challenge, let me tell you, to sit and write and think about stories. Then I'd go to bed at night and who the hell is ever going to read this book? So we'll see what happens with it when it comes out. But it's got some great stories, and I think it's going to be a pretty good resource for hockey people. I really do. Well,
without giving too much away, I'd really like to know what you've learned about selecting players on draft day to join an organization.
Well, I'll tell you what, the draft, the gist of the book is if an NHL team doesn't have at least 10 of their own draft picks on their team, they typically don't win the Stanley Cup. So drafting is so, so important. And you know what? I had a lot of hits and misses because you're drafting 17 and 18-year-olds. And it is one of the toughest. And every team has made colossal mistakes, and every team has made great picks. But when you're drafting 18-year-olds, it is a crapshoot. It really is. It is so. Now it's a little more refined than when I was there, but it's still. If you just don't know if an 18-year-old is going to be a player at 21. You just don't know that. So I go through the book and I learn a lot about it. And when I say I'd like to have a do-over, with my media relations at times. If I could go back, I think if I could go back now and draft after reading my book 100 times, I think I'd be better at it. But there's one great story in there. Nick Kiprio said to me, I made a selection in one draft where I took Gilbert Brulé at number 6. And the battle at our table, the battle all year was, do we take Briere or Kopitar? And Kopitar was sitting there at 6, and I took Briere. And I made the call to take him. And Kopitar went 11 to L.A., kid from Slovenia. Brulé played 175 games in the NHL. Kopitar is still playing with the LA Kings. And he was picked 11th. So I picked 6. I didn't take him at 6, and he didn't go to 11. So there's a lot of guys the same as me that weren't that smart, after me. So Nick Kiprio said to me one day, what do you think that pick, you taking Brulé ahead of Kopitar, cost you as an NHL general manager? I said, well, I would say taking Brulé instead of Kopitar personally cost me about $30 million, because I probably would still be a general manager today if I took Kopitar. And you know what? And I think back, oh my God, you know how many nights I lost sleep over thinking about that? And I've been ripped for that pick, but it's a great chapter in the book about why we went with that decision and why taking an 18-year-old, you just don't know. And there was 7 or 8 guys after me that made the same mistake, but it haunts me to this day. It haunts me, So it's kind of funny. So the writing of the book really gave me another look at the whole NHL picture, and it was fun to do, but a ton of work. There will be no second book, let me tell you. I'll do podcasts, but no second book.
Well, we're very happy that you're doing podcasts, but maybe we can talk about that second book off air. But I want to ask you about your childhood, because if I could take you back, Doug, knowing what you know now, if I could take you back and introduce you to that boy that was skating around Cahill Stadium for hours and hours and hours on end, knowing what you know now, what would you say to him?
Well, you know what? I'll never forget Mom and Dad telling me that when they took me to skate for the first time at Cal Stadium, they put me on the ice as a 5-year-old, and Mom came home, and Mom and Dad were trying to say, we never have to worry about Doug being in hockey. He's not going to be a player, watching him, And it became a huge part of my life. And I guess I would say it, and I've said it to my own son when Clark was growing up as a young player. You number one, to make it in hockey, you have to love the game. You've got to love the game. If you don't love the game, you don't have a chance. There's some players in the NHL that don't really love the game, but a huge percentage of them love the game. So if you love the game, chase your dreams. I went as far as Montreal Junior Canadiens, St. Louis Blues NHL training camp, played junior hockey in a way. I left home when I was 16 to pursue the dream, 1,000 miles away in Montreal as a kid. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life to go away and try to be an NHL player. And then when I did become an NHL player and became a high school teacher, my dream was to be a coach. And to make the NHL as an NHL coach from coaching in Summerside, PEI, it's a long way away. And I guess it's, everybody says chase your dreams, but I just believe in yourself and, shoot for as high as you can. And it's amazing. If you fall short, you're still in pretty good shape. So you got to chase your dreams. And I dreamt about being a player and a coach. That's all I ever dreamt about. And I got to spend my whole career in hockey. How lucky am I? Seriously. Unbelievably lucky.
Doug, you've retired. You've come out and said that from both coaching and GM work, and you've also stepped back, well, mostly from the media work. But of course, you've got the book out. But the final question I'd like to ask you is, sitting here now in Prince Edward Island, reflecting on all of these people that you've interacted with, all these organisations you've been a part of, and people that you're still in contact today from your time when you were in your late teens. What do you think the legacy is that you've left with these people?
Oh, never really thought of that because I think I always think of legacies as things for famous people, but I don't consider myself that. I often wonder, what people would say about me when I'm gone, and I think it comes back to the thing I'm most proud of is treat people well, treat people right, be honest and a straight shooter. And sometimes it gets you in trouble, but I think that's a loyal person, a loyal friend, a loyal teammate, a loyal co-worker. That's what I'd be. If people said I was just an honest, loyal, straight shooter, I'd be pretty happy.
I think honest, loyal, and straight shooting, probably a pretty good way for us to finish. So, Doug, thank you so much for carving out a little bit of time today. I do appreciate hearing your story. I have appreciated learning a lot about your background and learning a little bit more about ice hockey as well. And I wish you all the best for the publication of the book.
Appreciate it very much. And thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. And very, very insightful questions. I typically don't get that in interviews, where I have to really think.
Thanks, Doug.
Made me think. Thanks, Paul.
Hi everyone, you have been listening to the great coach, Doug Maclean. I hope you got a lot out of Doug's down-to-earth style and found a few ideas that you can bring to your own dinner table, locker room or boardroom table for discussion. With a bit of luck, we'll get Doug back later in the year to talk about his new book. And just before we go, if you have any feedback, then please let us know. Just like Banana Man, who said, "Terrific. James Kerr's thoughts on legacy and life gave me plenty to reflect on." Thanks, Banana Man. We love the interaction with the people around the world who listen, and so if you have any feedback or comments, please let us know. And if they're positive ones, then please spread them on social media for us. All the details on how to connect with us are in the show notes or on our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com.
Big news! Boost Mobile is now sending experts nationwide to deliver and set up customers' new phones at home or work.
Wait, we're going on tour?
Not a tour. We're delivering and setting up customers' phones so it's easier to upgrade.
Let's get in the tour bus and hit the road.
No, not a tour bus. It's a regular car we use to deliver and set up customers' phones at home or work.
Are you a groupie on this tour?
We deliver and set up phones. It's not a tour.
Oh, you're definitely a groupie.
Introducing Store to Door. Switch and get a new device with expert setup and delivery wherever you're at.
Delivery available for select devices purchased at boostmobile.com.